Rio de Janeiro, March 1989. The new motor racing year began here, full of optimism, with turbochargers now banned and the crowds hoping to see the closest racing in years. In store for them was a season of unprecedented drama on the track and off. Alessandro Nannini leads the players out for the first practice session of the season. The Brabhams of Modena and Brundle, Bootson's Williams, new champion Senna with the McLaren, Nigel Mansell now with Ferrari, Christian Danner's Real, Mauricio Gugelmin, and his teammate Ivan Capelli in the Marches, split by Nicola Nerini's Azella. Johnny Herbert making his debut for Benetton, Andrea de Cesaris with the Dallara. Behind him, Olivier Griard's Ligier, the Lola Lamborghini of Philippe Alliot. Then Alain Prost with his McLaren, Eddie Cheever with the Arrows, the Minardi of Spaniard Luis Sala, Gerhard Berger with the other Ferrari, Martini's Minardi, Michele Alboretto's Tyrrell. Behind him, the Lotuses of Nelson Piquet and Satoru Nakajima. And finally, Derek Warwick's Arrows. Despite the new regulations, the McLaren drivers Ayrton Senna and Alain Prost were still expected to dominate. At this stage, they were still speaking to one another. But the Ferrari challenge was strong, with a new car, a 7-speed electronic gearbox, and Gerhard Berger now joined by Britain's Nigel Mansell. Hopes ran high in the Williams camp, with a new Renault engine for Riccardo Patrese, now in his 13th Grand Prix season, and Thierry Boutsen, the quiet Belgian, still looking for his first win. Mauricio Gugelmin of Brazil continued in the ever-cheerful March team with Ivan Capelli, who was so impressive last year. And at Benetton there was Alessandro Nannini, and he was joined by a new British name, the gallant Johnny Herbert, still in pain from his Formula 3000 leg injuries, but delighted with his move into Formula One. Behind the scenes, the various other commercial interests continued to battle it out. In the tyre wars, Goodyear were providing rubber for 12 of the teams. Meanwhile, Pirelli were looking after 6, including Italian teams like Minardi, Dallara, Azella and Coloni. The season started, literally, with a bang in Brazil. Senna's McLaren was on pole, with Patrese's Williams alongside and Berger's Ferrari behind. As Berger moved alongside Senna going into the first corner, they discovered 2 into 1 won't go. Exit Berger. Senna's McLaren has lost its front wing. And into the lead goes Riccardo Patrese in the Williams. But let's see the start from Thierry Boutsen's eye view. Watch his mirror when the wreckage starts to fly. A wipe of the helmet, which was also hit by debris, and keep racing. But for Berger, the first race is over almost before it started. Ayrton Senna, who got away more lightly, called into the McLaren pit for a new nose and a check-up, and this dropped him out of the running. But wreckage had punctured Boutsen's radiators, and his engine blew, so he had to park. Meanwhile, back in the race, Mansell, in the other Ferrari, was after Patrese's lead. A feint to the left, and he almost got on the grass as he went by on the right. And that surprised Patrese not a little. Mansell's first tyre stop went according to plan, but it allowed Alain Prost through into the lead. However, Prost's clutch had failed and he was changing gear without it. So Mansell rejoined the fray and was soon challenging for the lead once more. For Nigel, Alain Prost proved more of a gentleman than Patrese had done. So pulling out of the slipstream, the Englishman went by into the lead again. Prost, his tyres badly worn, didn't dare risk another pit stop without a clutch to restart. And soon he had Mauricio Gugelmin's March and the impressive Herbert's Benetton on his tail. The crowd rose to applaud a Ferrari victory. One lunatic ran in front of Mansell's car as he took the flag. And the struggling Alain Prost just held off Gugelmin and Herbert for second spot. For Herbert, this fourth place was a magnificent start to his Grand Prix career, and Derek Warwick in the Arrows just held off Nannini's Benetton by half a second for 2 championship points. For Mansell, it was a fairy tale first drive for Ferrari, and in Ferrari-mad Italy, he at once took on the status of a saint. And it was Italy to which the Formula One circus went for round 2, the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, with the local fans cheering the Ferraris to the echo. But on the grid, it was Senna and Prost at the front, with Mansell and Patrese behind. Senna went straight into the lead at the start. Down into the tight left-hander on the first lap, he locked up a wheel. Mansell was third behind Prost, with Berger fifth behind Boutsen's Williams-Renault. At the tight Acqua Minerale chicane, the order was the same, with the crowd willing on the Ferraris. But as Senna opened out his lead, behind the top 6, Capelli's 7th-placed March got it very wrong at Rivazza. Now came Berger's horrifying accident. At the 150-mile-an-hour left-hander after the start, Berger's Ferrari went straight on and into the barrier at sickening speed, disintegrating along the bank and bursting into flames. With poor Gerhard unconscious in the cockpit, the fire blazed for long seconds, and the shocked onlookers feared the worst. But the marshals were quickly on the scene and got the fire out. Miraculously, Berger's injuries were only slight. After Berger had been removed to hospital, the race was restarted. Prost took the lead this time, only for Senna to dive past into the left-hander. This was the real start of the enmity between the two McLaren drivers, for Prost said it violated an agreement made between them. The two McLarens raced away, instantly in a class of their own. Modena was another to fall victim to the slippery Rivazza, doing his Brabham no good at all. Senna continued to lead, pursued by the angry Prost, and a fine battle for third between Patrese's Williams and Mansell's Ferrari ended when Patrese's engine blew. Mansell was out with gearbox problems a couple of laps later. It just wasn't Ferrari's day. After that, there was little to watch except Senna's majestic progress. He was 40 seconds ahead of Prost when the checkered flag came out. The rest of the field were all lapped, with Nannini third. Boutsen was fourth home, but was disqualified for changing tyres during the stoppage, which promoted Warwick, Jonathan Palmer with the Tyrrell, and Tarquini with the AGS. Senna looked happy on the rostrum, Prost less so. They would henceforth be barely on speaking terms. And now it was off to the millionaire's playground of Monte Carlo for round 3. Getting through the first corner on the first lap without mishap is rare at Monte Carlo. But somehow all 26 of them managed it this time. It was Senna from Prost once again in the McLarens, with Boutsen third and Mansell fourth in the only Ferrari, as Berger was still recovering from his Imola injuries. Round the Lowe's hairpin, perhaps the tightest corner in Grand Prix racing, only René Arnoux had alternative ideas about the line. Then Rascasse, with the Brabham of Brundle, who qualified a magnificent fourth, fifth now from Warwick to Cesaris, Modena in the other Brabham, and Martini. Brundle was hanging on magnificently to Mansell, and now Prost was putting the pressure on Senna, whose gearbox wasn't quite right. But at Monaco, closing is one thing. Getting past is quite another. Boutsen had stopped to mend a loose wing. And this is Martin Brundle's cockpit view at Rascasse, closing on Mansell. Brundle was able to close up and pass the Ferrari for a glorious third place as Mansell dropped back with more gear selection problems. De Cesaris, in a fine fourth in the Dallara, was lapping Piquet's Lotus when the door got slammed at the Lowe's hairpin. The cars were locked together, the road was blocked. This is Modena selecting reverse gear to get through. Poor De Cesaris was beside himself with rage. And now Brundle's Brabham was misfiring. He came in and actually despairingly got out of the car. But after a battery change, he was able to rejoin in 10th place. And so for Senna, it was another easy victory. Poor Ivan Capelli lost 6th place with a blown engine on the final lap. So, to the delight of Herbie Blash and the Brabham team, not only was Modena third, but also Brundle's comeback drive gave him a point for 6th place. For Alex Caffey and for Dallara, their 4th place was a best ever. And Michele Alboreto was delighted with 5th in a Tyrrell that was only 3 days old. Senna was now joint championship leader with Prost, and his pleasure showed in his unbridled use of the victory champagne. And now it was off to Mexico for round 4 and the twisting Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez on the edge of Mexico City. Senna took his customary pole by almost a second from Prost. Mansell's Ferrari came next. At the start, Mansell nearly got squeezed. But as the pack sorted itself out for the first corner, it was Senna from Prost. Behind the two McLarens came the two Ferraris in pursuit, and then the Williams pair and Alboreto's Tyrrell, which had qualified a good 7th. The McLarens were on different tyre setups. Senna had opted for harder B compound rubber on the left of the car and softer C compound on the right, while Prost had chosen C's all round. In 3rd place was the brave Gerhard Berger, making his comeback after missing only one race since Imola. His burned hands were still heavily bandaged, but the two Ferraris looked like giving the McLarens their strongest threat, if only their gearboxes could go the distance. But as Senna romped away, it soon became clear that Prost's tyre choice had been wrong, and the Frenchman came in for fresh rubber. The front left tyre gave problems and stuck briefly, but worse than that was that the left rear tyre was still the wrong rubber, due to a mechanic's error. Behind the smooth Senna, Berger had retired with, need you ask, a broken gearbox. But Prost's stop had promoted Mansell to 2nd place, until he was left to jog home, beached by, yes, gearbox maladies again. And now Riccardo Patresi's Williams Renault was 2nd. And the impressive Michele Alboreto was 3rd in the Tyrrell, to the delight of the designer, Harvey Postlethwaite. So another 9 easy points for Senna. And for Prost, who'd had to stop again to get the correct tyres, the first time he'd finished lower than 2nd this year. Alessandro Nannini scored his 3rd points of the year, and for AGS, Tarquini was in the points again. More champagne jinx with the two Italians on the rostrum coming off worst. But of course Senna has had more practice at this. And now Senna had broken clear in the World Championship table, 7 points in front of Prost at the quarter distance mark of the season. Nigel Mansell was 3rd, but only by a point. So to the fifth round and a new Grand Prix on the calendar. This is the city of Phoenix, Arizona, where a new street circuit had been laid out right in the heart of the city. Senna kept his unbroken run of poles. Prost was second on the grid, Nannini third, and at the start, Ayrton took a predictable lead from Prost, Nannini, Mansell, Caffey and the Dallara, and the Brabhams of Brundle and Modena. Like all new street circuits, the track was like a tunnel of concrete, with reference points hard to identify. It was bumpy, it was very hot, and it was dusty. Martin Brundle, trying to dive past Caffey, found this out the hard way. In the traffic, he was very lucky to get away with this understeering manoeuvre. But as the McLarens continued to lead, Brundle, not at all thrown by the incident, dived past Berger's Ferrari on the next lap. It was starting to look like yet another McLaren 1-2. The Honda-powered cars were once again in a class of their own. Nigel Mansell was now leading the pursuit from Caffey, Modena and the recovering Brundle. Derek Warwick attacked De Cesaris, but it didn't work out, although De Cesaris got away again rapidly. And Nannini, feeling unwell after a warm-up accident, came in to retire. Then Nigel Mansell was in trouble. He brought the Ferrari in with alternator problems. And now came drama for the McLaren machine. Senna's car was misfiring and Prost was through. McLaren boss Ron Dennis talked Senna in to retire. Alain Prost was now an unchallenged leader. And up into second place came Patrase's Williams, with Arizona boy Eddie Cheever passing Berger to take a magnificent third for Arrows. For Prost, it was his first win of 1989, in a tough race that went over the 2-hour mark in intense heat. Christian Danis Rial was fourth, from Johnny Herbert in the points again, and Thierry Boutsen. For Patrese, it was 2 second places on the trot. And for Cheever, who of course was born in Phoenix, this was a particularly proud rostrum moment. So to Montreal, the St. Lawrence River and the picturesque Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, named after Canada's greatest ever driver. After morning rain, the track was still wet as the field lined up. But Mansell and Nannini came in to change to slicks, and were incorrectly allowed out of the supposedly closed pit lane. So they were already on the track at the green light. Both were later black flagged. Senna missed pole here, and it was Prost who held him off at the start. Although Senna had a good go at going round the outside. In the first series of corners, Berger got very sideways trying to get past Patrese. Down to the hairpin, it was Prost, Senna, Patrese, Berger, Boutsen and the Dallaras. But a lap later, Prost was bound for the pits with a suspension breakage, and Senna was through and away. But now the rain had stopped and the road was drying out. So Senna decided to come in to change to slicks. That left a Williams 1-2, with Patrese leading Boutsen and Berger's Ferrari third. And now the rain returned, and as Patrese pulled away, Berger took Boutsen for second at the hairpin. For both of them, the surface was like a skating rink, but the weather kept changing. Boutsen made a stop for slicks, and then came in again to revert to wet tyres. When he rejoined after this second stop, the eventual winner was down in 12th place. Senna too had to stop for more wets, and then Patrese had a tyre stop which promoted an on-form Derek Warwick into the lead, although Senna, at his wet weather best, had come charging up the order and was soon leading again. Boutsen had caught Patrese, who was being slowed with a loose undertray, but his teammate wasn't going to make it easy to get by. And then it was all over for Senna. With 3 laps to go, his engine had blown, and as he walked away, Thierry Boutsen took the lead and the flag to score his first Grand Prix victory from teammate Patrese. The Dellaras were 3rd and 6th. Arnoux Ligier scored a couple of points behind Piquet's Lotus. Fastest lap went to Jonathan Palmer's Tyrrell, and no McLarens finished. An unusual Grand Prix. Real delight on the rostrum, particularly from De Cesaris on the right, for his best ever finish for Dallara. And then it was back to Europe and Paul Ricard for the French Grand Prix. Here Prost took pole again, having just announced he would be leaving McLaren at the season's end. But at the start it was Senna who led down to the first corner. Behind them, watch for Mauricio Gugelmin's March missing its braking point and launching itself over Boutsen's Williams. Happily, no one was hurt. That's Palmer. And that's Stefan Johansson behind Gugelmin. René Arnoux being helped out with his seat. And there's Gugelmin out of the car and none the worse for wear. Now let's see it from Boutsen's cockpit. Hard on the power and up through the gearbox. But Gugelmin is about to hit his left rear corner. There it is. Boutsen presses on, while Griard goes by and clouts the wingless Mansell. The race was stopped to clear the debris. And here's the restart, with Gugelmin, Mansell and others in spare cars. And now Senna hit trouble. Second gear stripped as he left the line. And so it was Prost clearly in front from Nannini, Berger and Boutsen. For the 3rd Grand Prix running, Senna was out. This time everyone got through the first corner unharmed. Onto the back straight, the Ferrari was up to 2nd. With Boutsen challenging Nannini into the 170-mile-an-hour right-hander at the end of the straight. For a while, the first 4 ran together. Then Berger had a quick spin. And Nannini, lying second, had a high-speed suspension breakage. He just missed Nakajima's Lotus. Capelli made it up to second in the march, but then his engine blew. So Patrese was second, but he had a spin, although he kept the engine going. And through all this came Nigel Mansell in the spare Ferrari to 2nd place. A fine drive and his first points since Brazil. Prost took the flag to win his home Grand Prix. Patrese recovered to finish 3rd. 4th was newcomer Jean Alesi, who'd replaced Michele Alboreto in the Tyrrell team. And Johansson scored first points for Onyx in 5th place. Prost was a happy man. He now had an 11-point lead over Senna. But a week later, we were on Nigel Mansell's home ground at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix. But not everyone was rooting for the Ferrari driver. Senna was back on pole from Prost, but with Mansell third. And at the green light, Prost was first away from Senna, Mansell and Berger. But by Maggot's curve, Senna had moved ahead from the two Ferraris, the two Williams Renaults and Nannini's Benetton. ...190 miles an hour on the Hangar Straight, and this is a real Senna versus Prost battle. Then it's Mansell, Berger, Boutsen, Patrese, Nannini, Martini, Piquet, and behind them it was every man for himself. But as the McLaren started to ease away, Mansell, cheered on by his home crowd, was going like a man possessed in third place. Meanwhile, Senna's new gearbox was starting to prove difficult. And look at what happened as they went down to Beckett's on lap 12. At once the crowd showed whose side they were on. Now Mansell started to pressure Prost. Could this be another fairy tale home win for the darling of the Silverstone crowd? The rueful Senna had a grandstand view. This was the nearest a Ferrari had been to a McLaren since Brazil. Then, at 160 miles an hour, Patrese went off at club. It was a huge accident, and everyone was very relieved to see Ricciardo squirm out of the wreckage, unhurt. Then for Mansell there was drama, a right front puncture. He slithered round on the flat at high speed, got a rapid wheel change, and was back in the race without losing his second place. But of course, by now, Prost was long gone. This is Nelson Piquet's Lotus, losing third place to Nannini's Benetton with 9 laps to go. And so, Alain Prost scored his third win of the year. And if the British crowd couldn't see a Mansell victory, they were happy to applaud the popular Alain. And quite a surprise, the two Minardis of Martini and Sala both finished in the points. This time Prost not only sprayed the champagne, he even drank some of it. Silverstone had brought us to the halfway point in the season. 8 races gone, 8 to go. And Alain Prost now had a 20-point lead over Ayrton Senna. Riccardo Patrese was in third place, only 5 points behind the Brazilian, and Nigel Mansell was a further 1 point adrift of Patrese. Germany came next. The tranquil university town of Heidelberg on the banks of the Neckar is in stark contrast to the concrete bowl of Hockenheim. A predictable grid. Senna and Prost in the McLarens, Mansell and Berger in the Ferraris, Patrese and Boutsen in the Williams Renaults. But look at Gerhard Berger's start. The Ferrari went straight into the lead, while further back Alio's Lola pirouetted onto the verge, and then rejoined among the course cars. But by the first chicane, Senna was already through and Prost was going through, squeezing past between the curbs. Back at the stadium, it was the usual script. McLaren, McLaren. Ferrari, Ferrari. Then behind Boutsen, the Benettons of Nannini and Pirot, who'd replaced Johnny Herbert after Montreal. Behind the McLarens, Mansell was now pushing teammate Berger hard. The two Ferraris ran close together until Berger picked up a puncture. Let's ride with him in the cockpit as he approaches one of the chicanes. Conclusively the end of poor Gerhard's race. While Gerhard walked home, Ayrton Senna came in for his routine tyre stop. But there was a problem with the right rear tyre. Prost had already had his pit stop, and while Senna fumed impatiently and the mechanics worked away, Alain Prost came into the stadium and went through to take the lead. By the time Senna was rocketing down the pit road, he was now in second place. Emanuele Pirot ran out of road coming into the stadium. Those blocks may be made of polystyrene, but he sustained cuts and bruises. And then, with 3 laps to go, Prost suddenly lost top gear, and with it, the lead. Senna was passed in an instant and drove on to take the checkered flag to score his first win for 5 races. And for Ayrton, that's a long time. Mansell in third place was so far behind that Prost's second place was not in jeopardy. And once again, Patrese, Piquet and Warwick were in the points. So the luck had turned Senna's way again. But the next race was going to be a different story. Now it was off east to the Hungarian Grand Prix and the historic city of Budapest. And on the tight Hungaroring, McLaren were in trouble. Patrese took pole for Williams, with Caffey third behind Senna and Boutsen fourth. And at the start, Ricciardo made a perfect start, and then shut the door firmly on Senna at the first corner. Caffey was third from Berger, Prost and Boutsen, while Nigel Mansell, after a disastrous practice, had started 12th. Brundle was lucky to get away with this and end up pointing in the right direction. And meanwhile, Patrese continued to lead, with the impressive Caffey in third place, Prost fifth behind Berger and Boutsen next. Mansell was already a charging 8th, having passed 4 cars in half a lap. But Patrese and Senna were having a race of their own. Prost, meanwhile, was starting to come through, taking 4th from Caffey and tearing off a visor layer as he did so. While Berger, who got up to 3rd behind Senna, had an early stop for fresh tyres. It dropped him to 6th, and now at the front there was a wonderful 4-car battle for the lead. Patrese, Senna, Prost and the amazing Mansell, who'd now carved his way up to 4th. And that became 3rd as he passed Prost. Derek Warwick brought his arrows out of the pits and was tripped over by Nakajima's Lotus. Senna went into the lead as Patrese fell back with a holed radiator. But then Nigel Mansell, in one of the great opportunist moves of the year, got alongside Senna as they lapped Johansson's Onyx and was through. It was the first time a McLaren had been beaten in a straight fight for many moons. And even in Hungary, they all seemed to be Ferrari fans, judging by the crowd's reaction. Prost came in for fresh rubber, dropping to 5th place. The McLarens had been humbled on this tight circuit. Mansell stayed ahead of Senna all the way to score his second Ferrari victory. In the Prancing Horse pit, joy was unconfined. And for Williams, Bootson's third place was some recompense for Patrese ill luck, and Prost pipped Cheever for fourth place on the last lap. For Nigel Mansell on the rostrum, it was a sweet moment, and he was now third in the championship. But now it was back west to Belgium and a rain-soaked Spa. Spa is a spectacular road circuit even in the dry, and in conditions like this it was a truly daunting prospect. In Saturday's dry practice it had been Senna from Prost, Berger from Boutsen. But at the green light, going up to the first hairpin, Mansell made a great start to leapfrog past both the Williams Renaults. Down the hill to Eau Rouge and up the other side, the visibility was almost impossible for all but leader Senna. But miraculously, everyone was still on the island so far. At the top of the hill, it was still 2 McLarens, 2 Ferraris, 2 Williamses, and then Nannini and a well-placed Warwick. Down in the valley, Senna was increasing his lead in these conditions, while Prost was being pushed now by Berger, with Mansell holding off Boutsen and Patrese. Alliot and Arnoux had tangled, and Alliot, rejoining, nearly took off a few more. Then, half a lap later, the two of them did it again at the hairpin. By now, Senna was way out in front, with the Ferraris chasing Alain Prost. Watch Mansell literally floating through Eau Rouge. After 9 laps, Berger lost his Ferrari on the streaming surface and had to walk home. But Mansell, fighting every inch of the way, was chasing Prost hard. Prost, as usual, was unruffleable. But Mansell kept the pressure up, even to the extent of using some pretty unusual lines, particularly at the hairpin, in his efforts to get close enough to get by. Their battle took them closer to Senna, but all of Mansell's efforts weren't able to prevent a McLaren 1-2 today. At the flag, 1.8 seconds covered the first 3. The crowd were delighted to see local hero Boutsen coming home 4th, and Nannini and Warwick were in the points once again. But as far as the championship was concerned, Senna could reflect, as he sprayed the champagne, that he was still 11 points adrift of Prost, with 5 races left to go. The next one was Italy and Monza, where even if you're not a Ferrari fan, you can feel the atmosphere. Senna had pole, but the Ferraris were second and third on the grid. Prost, complaining of a lack of power, was 4th. Let's watch the start from Nannini's cockpit, with the Williamses of Boutsen and Patrese ahead. Into the first chicane, it was Senna, Berger, Mansell, and Prost was trapped in 4th place, ahead of Boutsen and Nannini. Gugelmin was the first to take the slower route. To the ecstatic delight of the crowd, the Ferraris, and particularly Berger, were staying with Senna. Further back, Jean Alesi was doing a remarkable job with the Tyrrell in 8th place, behind Nannini and Patrese. And here's our old friend Alliot, getting the Variante Ascari a little bit wrong on the first lap. Down to the Parabolica, and Mansell in third place is losing touch with Berger. Already the demon gearbox is starting to misbehave. Before long, he has Prost challenging hard. But the crowd are prepared to smile on the Frenchman because this weekend he's announced his Ferrari contract for 1990. Finally, Mansell waved Prost through. And shortly after, he was out. It was the gearbox once again. The crowd showed their dismay and disapproval in noisy Monza fashion. Prost, really flying now, got up alongside Berger for second on the home straight. Side by side at 180 miles an hour, but Alain had the inside line for the chicane and was through. Senna was still a comfortable leader at this point. But with 9 laps to go, he was smoking. His engine blown, he spun on his own engine oil. And the crowd cheered this blow for a Ferrari enemy. But nothing was going to stop Prost, who romped home 7 seconds ahead of Berger, with the Williams Renaults of Boutsen and Patrese next, and Alesi and Brundle both in the points for Tyrrell and Brabham. But Prost was still unhappy with his treatment from McLaren, saying publicly he wasn't getting engines of the same power as Senna, and in an extraordinary gesture on the rostrum, he gave away his winner's trophy to the crowd. Four races left to go, and at this three-quarter point in the season, Prost still had his full 20 points in hand over Senna. Nigel Mansell, despite his retirement at Monza, was still there in third place, with Riccardo Patrese 10 points down. And now came the last 2 rounds in Europe, the Portuguese and Spanish races. Portugal came first, just inland from the delightful coastal resort of Estoril. This was to be one of those eventful Grand Prix that go into the history books. At the start, Berger outgunned poleman Senna, with Mansell in the other Ferrari moving up to join the fun. Berger looked like staying there, with Senna being harried by Mansell and Prost leading the pursuit in 4th place. While the Austrian continued to lead, Senna came under real pressure from Mansell. And Mansell made a determined and confident move out of the slipstream on the straight to make it a Ferrari 1-2. Before long, the flying Englishman was on Berger's tail. And as they came up to lap some traffic, Mansell saw a gap and went for it to take the lead. Although he had to go 3 abreast with Warwick and Modena to do it. Then came Mansell's routine tyre stop, and he came in too fast and overshot his pit. Before the mechanics could pull him back, he reversed, which is forbidden by the rules. The tyre stop itself went according to plan, although Berger and Senna went by while Mansell was stationary. So, when Nigel rejoined, it was to chase Ayrton Senna. While Berger continued in the lead, the officials got the black flag ready for Mansell. But Nigel was concentrating on catching Senna. He did it on the straight and moved alongside. He thought he was through, but Senna came across on his line. The cars were tangled and out of the race. A furious Ron Dennis went to complain to Ferrari's Cesare Fiorio that Mansell had ignored the black flag. All this promoted Stefan Johansson's Onyx to third place. Prost was an unchallenged second. And Gerhard Berger went on to score Ferrari's third win of the year. Nannini was fourth. Pierluigi Martini, who'd briefly led the race during the pit stops, was fifth in his Minardi, with Jonathan Palmer sixth. And the happiest man at the end was Stefan Johansson, who'd given Onyx their first rostrum finish. On to Spain and the Jerez circuit without Nigel Mansell, whose punishment for missing that Estoril black flag was a one-race ban. This is Alain Prost's eye view at the start, with Senna on his customary pole and Berger in the lone Ferrari next. At the green light, it was McLaren, Ferrari, McLaren, with the ever-improving Martini battling for fourth with Patrese Williams. Chasing the rearward-facing camera on Martin Brundle's Brabham are Pirot's Benetton, Alesi's Tyrrell and Modena Brabham. But at the front, Berger was intent on repeating his Portuguese victory, while behind Prost came Patrese, Martini, Alliot and Brundle. But overtaking on the twisty Jerez circuit is no easy matter, and Senna determinedly fended off Berger's every move. Pirot was still pushing Brundle hard. Senna was moving away into a clear lead, while Berger, Prost and Patrese were still running together for second. Although Prost's visor was now coated with the Ferrari's oil, the rest of them were still chasing hard, with Nannini moving up from a lowly start past Modena's Brabham. Nicola Larini's race with the Azella ended in the wall. Everybody needed a tyre stop on this tight abrasive circuit. This was Prost's, which lasted just 9 seconds. It brought him out again, right in front of Pirot's Benetton. Senna was now comfortably ahead of Berger, whose Ferrari was still leaking oil. Although on this track, Senna had some trouble with back markers and got angry with several of them, among others Philippe Alliot. Berger, watching his oil gauge, hung on to second place, with Prost, bothered by a bulky gearbox, third. Senna went on to take the flag, having just lapped a great battle for fourth between Alesi's Tyrrell and Patrese Williams. So another good day's work for Ayrton Senna. But even though Alain Prost was now having to drop points because you can only count your best 11 scores, the Frenchman's lead of 16 points meant that Senna had to win the 2 final races to be champion. It was a sober-looking Ayrton who accepted the victor's trophy. Round 15 was at Suzuka in Japan and brought us perhaps the most extraordinary incident in an extraordinary season. At the start, Senna, on pole as usual, was quick off the line, but Prost was quicker. And Berger was almost alongside Senna as they dived into the first corner ahead of Nannini, Patrese, Mansell and Boutsen. And if the crowd expected Senna to overwhelm Prost, they were wrong. Prost was on absolutely superb form and looking indomitable. Relations between the two McLaren drivers were by now very frosty. They hadn't really been on speaking terms since Imola in April, and there was a lot riding on this race. But with 7 laps to go, Senna had gradually hauled Prost in, and after tailing the Frenchman, looking for a gap, he finally decided to go for a gap which may or may not have been there at the chicane. This is Prost's cockpit view. The two McLarens, locked together, skated to a halt. But while Prost instantly undid his belts and was out of the car in a trice, Senna persuaded the marshals to push him far enough for the car to bump start. The front nose section was damaged, but that didn't worry the Brazilian. "Keep pushing," he said to the marshals. And finally the Honda engine fired to a cheer from the pro-Honda crowd. As Alain Prost walked home, Senna weaved his way back onto the circuit. He was soon up with Nannini, whom he passed with a cheery wave, and went on to take the checkered flag 3 laps later. But when the 3 top drivers came out onto the rostrum, there was no Senna. He'd been disqualified, officially for rejoining the circuit at a different point from where he'd left it. So Nannini was the winner from Patrese and Boutsen. And in somewhat unfortunate circumstances, Alain Prost could now not be beaten and could celebrate his 3rd World Championship title. Meanwhile, Ayrton Senna sat quietly in a corner and pondered his fate. So to the final round in Adelaide and a new controversy, the weather. In teeming rain, Prost and others said it was too wet to race. Senna waited silently in his car, ready to go. The crowd waited too. And finally, there was a start. Prost had said he would do 1 lap and then retire in protest. But as the lights went green, he and Senna powered away side by side, almost colliding before Senna eased away into the first corner. At the end of the lap, Prost did as he said he would and came in. But now the organisers agreed with him. Out came the black flag, and the crowd settled down to wait under their umbrellas. But Alain Prost was going to stick to his decision. Without him, the field finally formed up once again. Once more, Ayrton Senna set off in front, with Pierluigi Martini's yellow Minardi giving chase. The conditions were actually still just as bad as ever. Nakajima was the first to spin after a tap from Griard. But this was to be the race of Nakajima's life. Senna instantly pulled out a big lead from Martini. Then came the Williamses of Boutsen and Patrese, Nannini, Mansell's Ferrari and De Cesaris in the Dallara, if you could see them. Prost may have been the only driver with the courage to say no, but the other 25 drivers were displaying a lot of courage out there on the impossibly slippery circuit. At the end of the first lap, the incredible Senna was 9 seconds ahead. Boutsen and Patrese were soon up to 2nd and 3rd, but the conditions were getting laughable. This is Jean Alesi's Tyrrell, and Nelson Piquet's Lotus, and Derek Warwick's Arrows, and Alex Caffey's Dallara. And watch Ayrton Senna lose the McLaren, gather it up again and carry on, still in the lead. I wonder he wasn't giddy. But then came disaster. Visibility was impossible, and Martin Brundle's Brabham was holding off Piquet's Lotus when Senna, lapping Piquet, was blinded by Brundle's spray. In the ensuing accident, Brundle's rear wing was torn off, and Senna's McLaren was now a three-wheeler. The brave Brazilian's drive was over. The same thing happened to Piquet as he came up behind Ghinzani's Azella with similar results. And through all this mayhem came Boutsen to score his second wet Grand Prix victory of the year. Nannini and Patrese were second and third, and Satoru Nakajima, driving the race of his life, finished fourth and set fastest lap. Not a McLaren driver in sight on the rostrum as Boutsen, Nannini and Patrese gave us the final champagne ritual of the year. But Senna's retirement meant that whatever the final result of the Japanese controversy, and McLaren's appeal against the disqualification had been rejected days before the Adelaide race, the championship was indisputably Prost's. Riccardo Patrese beat Mansell by 2 points and Boutsen by 3 for third place. And in all, this year no fewer than 29 drivers scored World Championship points, and that's a record. In the Constructors Championship, of course, McLaren had almost double the points of everyone else, with Williams-Renault the runners-up. And that was Grand Prix 1989. The arguments and the controversies will rage on, but the history books will agree on one thing. The winner of the Battle of McLaren, the 1989 world champion, was Alain Prost.